Imagine you are standing at attention. Your uniform is pressed. Your boots are polished. You have done everything right. Everything by the book. Everything they asked of you. You are a soldier. You are serving your country. You are prepared to die for a flag you believe in. And then, a man with more stars on his shoulder than you will ever earn looks you dead in the face and says the word. Not quietly, not by accident, loudly, deliberately, like a judge reading a sentence. Like a reminder of exactly what you are and exactly what you will never be, no matter how perfectly you press that uniform. Every man around you freezes. Nobody moves. Nobody speaks. Because in 1943, this is how it works. You absorb it. You survive it. You move on.
20 feet away.
Except 20 feet away, there is a man standing in the sand. A general, the most feared general in the entire United States Army. A man who once slapped a hospitalized soldier across the face. A man who cursed at colonels like they were children. A man with a riding crop, a pearl-handled pistol, and a temper that made 4-star generals take a step back.
He heard everything.
He heard everything. And what he does next, in the next 60 seconds, will shock every single person standing in that desert, including you. This is not a story about a hero. This is a story about a deeply flawed, violent, complicated man who in one unrepeatable moment chose to do something nobody expected. And what that choice means is the most dangerous question this story asks. To understand this moment, you need to understand the world it happened in. It is 1943. America is at war. 2 years after Pearl Harbor, American soldiers are fighting on two fronts, in the Pacific and in North Africa. The stakes could not be higher. The entire free world is watching. And the United States Army, the force fighting for freedom and democracy, is segregated. Let that sit for a second. The army fighting against the racial ideology of Nazi Germany is organized by race. Black soldiers eat separately. They sleep separately. They train separately. They are assigned to separate units, often the dirtiest, most dangerous, least celebrated jobs in the entire military. They carry ammunition. They bury the dead. They drive trucks through enemy fire. They build roads under sniper fire. They do the work that keeps the machine running. And then they are told to step aside when the cameras show up. Back home, it is worse. In the American South, a black man cannot sit at the same lunch counter as a white man. He cannot drink from the same water fountain. He cannot vote in the same election. He cannot walk through the same front door. And yet, he can die in the same war. He can bleed in the same sand. He can catch the same bullet. He can rot in the same foreign ground, thousands of miles from home. The United States government looked black men in the eye and said, "Your country needs you." And black men, despite everything, answered that call. Not because the country had earned that loyalty, but because they believed deeply, painfully, stubbornly that service might change something, that sacrifice might crack the door open, that maybe, on the other side of this war, America would finally see them. They were wrong, but they didn't know that yet. And in Tunisia, in 1943, one of those men was standing outside a supply depot, boots polished, uniform pressed, waiting for a morning that was about to change everything. His name was James Lattimore. He was young. He was disciplined. He was the kind of soldier that made sergeants nod with quiet approval, not because he was loud or flashy, but because he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was supposed to do every single time. In a war full of chaos, Lattimore was precise. His boots told you everything you needed to know about him. In the desert, in the sand, in the heat, in the grinding exhaustion of North Africa, those boots were polished every morning without fail. Not because anyone was checking, but because that polish meant something to him. It was control in a world that gave him very little of it. It was dignity in a system designed to strip it away. It was a quiet, daily act of defiance, the kind that doesn't make headlines, but costs everything to maintain. Lattimore had grown up in an America that told him his ceiling was low. His neighborhood, his school, the jobs available to men who looked like him. Every institution he had ever encountered had given him the same message, delivered in 100 different ways. You are less. And every single morning, James Lattimore polished his boots and said, "No, I am not." He had not come to North Africa to become a symbol. He had not come to prove a point. He had come because his country called him, because he believed in something larger than the cruelty of the system he was living inside. That belief, stubborn, expensive, quietly heroic, is what made what happened to him that morning so devastating. And it is what made what happened next so extraordinary. Now, before we go any further, we need to talk about George Patton. Not the movie version, not the cleaned-up, flag-waving, inspiring speech version, the real one. George S. Patton Jr. was by nearly every account one of the most brilliant military minds of the 20th century. He understood war the way a musician understands an instrument, instinctively, totally, with a frightening kind of genius. He could read a battlefield faster than most men could read a map. He pushed his troops harder, moved faster, and took ground more efficiently than almost any other commander in the Allied forces. His soldiers feared him. They also, many of them, would have followed him into hell. But Patton was also a man with a darkness in him that nobody could fully excuse or explain. In August of 1943, just weeks before the moment we are talking about, Patton visited a military hospital in Sicily. He walked through the ward. He stopped at the bed of a young soldier. The soldier was not physically wounded. He was suffering from what we now call PTSD, combat stress, shell shock. Patton called him a coward, and then he slapped him across the face, in a hospital, in front of nurses and doctors and other wounded men. The incident became a scandal. Eisenhower was furious. The press got hold of it. Patton was nearly removed from command. This is the man we are talking about. A man who slapped a traumatized soldier. A man who used language that would make your skin crawl. A man who carried contradictions the way other men carry weapons, constantly and with devastating effect. He was not a saint. He was not a symbol of racial justice. He was not the man you would write into a story as the hero of a civil rights moment. And that is precisely why what happened in Tunisia matters so much. Because what happened in Tunisia was not the act of a good man doing what good men do. It was the act of a flawed man, choosing in one split second to be better than everything he had been before. That choice from that man in that moment is the whole story. Tunisia, North Africa, the spring of 1943. The desert here is nothing like what movies show you. It is not romantic. It is not cinematic. It is brutal and grinding and relentless. The heat during the day is suffocating. The cold at night is shocking. The sand gets into everything: your food, your weapons, your lungs. Men are exhausted in ways that go deeper than sleep can fix. The North Africa campaign had been brutal. The Allied forces, American, British, and others, had been fighting Rommel's Afrika Korps across hundreds of miles of desert for months. The losses were significant. The pressure was enormous. By this point, the tide was turning. The Axis forces were being pushed back. Tunisia was the last major stronghold. Everyone could feel the end of this chapter approaching. But the end of a campaign doesn't mean the end of tension. If anything, it concentrates it. Men are tired. Men are angry. Men are carrying months of fear and loss in their bodies. And in that state, the worst of people tends to surface. The ugliness that polite society keeps contained gets loose. It was in this environment, this pressure cooker of exhaustion and violence and institutional racism, that Private Lattimore was standing outside a supply depot one ordinary morning. He was doing his job. Head up, back straight, uniform sharp, the boots polished. And down the line, a group of officers was moving through the area, inspecting, checking, the kind of routine military movement that happens 100 times a day in a theater of war. One of those officers was about to make a choice that would define him forever, and not in the way he expected.
His name is not the point. What he represents is. He was a senior officer, decorated, experienced, a man who had risen through the ranks of an institution that reflected at every level the racial hierarchy of the country that built it. He had an old South accent, the kind that carries centuries of assumption inside it, the kind that has never had to question itself because the world it grew up in never asked it to. He was not, in his own mind, a cruel man. That is the most important thing to understand about him. He was not twirling a mustache. He was not looking for a black soldier to humiliate. He was a man who had absorbed a worldview so completely, so deeply, that it had stopped feeling like a worldview and started feeling like reality. To him, the word he was about to say was not a weapon. It was just how things were. That is not a defense. It is not an excuse. It is something far more disturbing. Because cruelty that knows itself is dangerous, but cruelty that believes it is normal, that has stopped questioning itself entirely, that is the kind that builds systems, that writes laws, that designs armies where some men polish boots and other men get to decide whether those boots are good enough. He stopped in front of Private Lattimore. He looked at him, not the way you look at a soldier, the way you look at a thing. And he said the word, loud, clear, casual, like it cost him nothing. Because in his world, it never had. The word landed like a physical thing. You could feel it move through the air. Every man in earshot heard it. Black soldiers, white soldiers, officers, enlisted men, drivers, aides, dozens of witnesses, all of them suddenly, completely still. Nobody breathed. Private Lattimore did not move.
This is something that requires a moment of silence, because it is easy to misread. His stillness was not weakness. His silence was not surrender. It was something much harder than either of those things. It was the discipline of a man who had been trained by life long before the army trained him to survive moments exactly like this one. He had a split second to calculate. Every black man in America in 1943 had learned this calculation, this instant, exhausting life or death arithmetic. React and face the consequences that will fall entirely on you. Absorb and carry the weight of it forever. He stood there, back straight, eyes forward, boots polished. The words still hanging in the air around him, like smoke. Around him, the white soldiers were doing what white soldiers in 1943 were conditioned to do in this situation. Nothing. Not because they were all monsters. Some of them were uncomfortable. Some of them felt the wrongness of it. But discomfort is not action. And in a hierarchy built on rank and race, action requires a courage that most men in that moment simply did not have. The general had already begun to move on. Because why wouldn't he? Nothing ever happened. Nothing was supposed to happen. The rules, written and unwritten, guaranteed him that. Except 20 feet away, a riding crop was tapping against a leg. Patton had heard it, every single word, and for 1 second, maybe two, he was still. Now understand what was happening inside that stillness. This was not a simple moment for Patton. This was not a man who saw injustice and immediately, cleanly, heroically decided to act. This was a war happening inside him, because Patton knew the rules too. He had operated inside this system his entire career. He had used careless language himself. He had looked past racial injustice hundreds of times because the institution he served was built on it, and he had built himself inside that institution. He also knew what it would cost to speak. The offending officer was not far below him in rank. Publicly confronting him, dressing him down in front of enlisted men, was a violation of every unspoken code of officer culture. It would create enemies. It would create paperwork. It would create the kind of political headache that followed a man for years. Patton was already in trouble. The slapping incident was still fresh. Eisenhower was watching him. One more scandal could end everything. Every calculation said, let it go. Walk away. You didn't see it. And then something shifted. Maybe it was the sight of Lattimore standing there, perfectly still, perfectly disciplined, absorbing a humiliation he had done nothing to deserve, carrying it the way he had been forced to carry 1,000 humiliations before it. Maybe it was something simpler. Maybe Patton, this violent, contradictory, complicated man, had a line he hadn't fully known was there until someone crossed it in front of him. The riding crop began to tap. Once, twice, 3 times. And George Patton started walking. Everyone saw him move. That is the thing about Patton. When he moved with purpose, the air changed. Men who served under him described it the same way, over and over. There was something in his walk when he was about to unleash that made everything go quiet before he even opened his mouth. He crossed the distance between himself and the two men deliberately. No rush, no stumble. Every step measured, the riding crop still tapping. He positioned himself, and this detail matters, directly between Private Lattimore and the offending general. Not to the side, not at an angle, between them. A physical statement before a single word was spoken. He looked at the general. Not the way you look at a peer, the way Patton looked at problems he was about to dismantle. And then he spoke.
The heat of the
Witnesses would spend decades trying to remember his exact words. The heat of the moment, the shock of it made precision difficult. But the shape of what he said has survived, passed from soldier to soldier, written in letters home, recorded in memoirs. He told the general, in front of every man standing there, that the uniform Private Lattimore was wearing was the same uniform he was wearing. That the flag this soldier fought under was the same flag he fought under. That a man who could not look past the color of another man's skin to see the soldier beneath it had no place commanding men in his theater of war. He did not whisper it. He did not pull the general aside for a quiet, dignified, career-protecting conversation. He said it in the open, in the desert sun, in front of the drivers and the aides and the enlisted men and every witness God had placed in that space that morning. The general's face, by every account, went through several colors: anger, shame, disbelief. Because generals do not get dressed down in public, not like this, not by a peer, not in front of enlisted men. This was not how things were done. But Patton was not finished. He held the silence that followed his words. He let it sit there, heavy and enormous, and he did not fill it with apology or softening or diplomatic retreat. He let the general stand in it.
And then Patton turned away from the general, toward Private Lattimore. This was the moment, not the confrontation with the general, as powerful as that was. This was the moment that outlived everything else, the moment that soldiers who were there carried with them for the rest of their lives. Because Patton didn't have to turn. He had already made his point. He had already taken the risk. He had already violated every code of officer conduct that existed. Politically, professionally, the deed was done. He could have walked away. Instead, he turned to Private Lattimore. He looked at him, directly, fully, the way very few people in Lattimore's life, and almost no white men in authority, had ever looked at him. Not through him, not past him, not at the uniform or the rank or the color of his skin. At him. And he spoke to him. The exact words, like so much of this story, live in the accounts of witnesses rather than official records. History does not always write down the things that matter most, but what survives is the shape of it, the weight of it. He acknowledged what had happened. He did not pretend it away. He did not soften it with military language or institutional distance. Emotionally, he told Lattimore, in words that cost something real to say, from a man like Patton in a world like that one, that he was a soldier, that he was seen, that what had just happened to him was wrong. 3 sentences, maybe 4, but in 1943, from that man, in that place, those sentences landed like something seismic. Private Lattimore stood at attention throughout, back straight, eyes forward, boots polished. The general was reassigned within days, not with fanfare, not with a press conference, not with any official acknowledgement of what had happened in that desert. Quietly, efficiently, the way institutions handle their embarrassments when someone powerful enough forces their hand. He was moved away from Patton's theater, away from the men he had commanded, away from the war that was at this point turning decisively in the Allies' favor. He did not face a court-martial. He did not face public censure. His name did not appear in the newspapers. And this quiet, efficient, consequence-light reassignment is itself a piece of the story that demands attention. Because what happened to him was justice of a kind, a limited kind, the kind that institutions produce when they are forced to act but prefer not to. He was inconvenienced, he was embarrassed, he was moved like a piece on a board. But he was not broken. He was not truly held accountable. The machinery that had produced him, the culture that had taught him the word was acceptable, that had promoted him despite using it, that had built an army where his worldview was not just tolerated, but structurally embedded. That machinery kept running. One man moved. Everything else stayed exactly where it was. This is how systems protect themselves, not by defending the indefensible act, but by sacrificing the individual actor just enough to relieve the pressure, while leaving the foundation completely untouched. Patton had cracked the surface. He had not broken what was underneath.
The war ended in 1945. Private James Lattimore, like hundreds of thousands of black soldiers, packed his things and came home. He crossed the Atlantic. He saw the American coastline appear on the horizon. He was wearing his uniform. His boots were polished. He had served. He had survived. He carried in his body the weight of everything he had seen and done and endured in the deserts of North Africa. And America met him at the door, with Jim Crow waiting. The same water fountains, the same separate entrances, the same restaurants that would not seat him, the same jobs that were not available to him, the same voting booths that found technical reasons to turn him away, the same country operating by the same rules as if the war had happened on another planet. His uniform meant nothing here. The flag he had fought under flew over courthouses that would not give him justice. It flew over schools his children could not attend. It flew over a country that had pinned a medal on his chest and then told him where he could and could not sit. Here is the wound that lives beneath the legend of what Patton did. What happened in Tunisia was real. It mattered. It cost Patton something to do it. It meant something to every man who witnessed it. And for Private Lattimore, in that moment, in that desert, it was the first time a man with power had used that power to stand between him and cruelty.
That is not nothing.
That is not nothing. But it also did not follow him home. The dignity Patton defended on a Tuesday in North Africa, the American government systematically denied every day of the week back in Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, and 100 other places where James Lattimore had to figure out how to live.
One general
drew a line in the sand.
The
sand shifted. The line disappeared. And Lattimore polished his boots and kept walking, because that is what survival required of him in a country that had never fully decided to deserve him. So what do we do with this story? What do we do with George Patton? He slapped a traumatized soldier in a hospital bed. He used language that wounded people. He was a product of a racist era who carried that era inside him in ways he never fully confronted or overcame. And he walked 20 feet across a desert and defended a black soldier's dignity in public at personal and professional cost when every rule of the world he lived in told him not to. Both of these things are true at the same time about the same man. And here is the question this story actually asks, the one that is much harder than, was Patton a good person? Does a good act require a good person? We want our moral heroes clean. We want them consistent. We want the person who does the right thing to be someone who always does the right thing, someone whose record is unblemished, whose motives are pure, whose history doesn't complicate the moment. But that is not how human beings work. Human beings are contradictions walking around in uniforms. The same man who slaps a soldier defends one. The same man who has used careless, cruel language draws a line when he sees that language weaponized in front of him. The same man whose flaws are real and documented and inexcusable finds in one specific moment something in himself that is better than his worst. Does that make him a hero? No. Does it make what he did meaningless? Also no. What it makes him is human, messily, frustratingly, uncomfortably human. And here is the most dangerous part of this story. Change, real historical ground-level change, has almost never come from perfect people with clean records and pure motives. It has come from imperfect people making imperfect choices in imperfect moments, and those choices accumulating slowly, painfully, into something that shifts the world a fraction of a degree. Patton shifted something that day. Not enough, never enough, but something. And the question this story leaves you with is not, was Patton good? It is, what are you doing with your 20 feet? When the moment comes, when you hear the word, or see the act, or watch the cruelty land on someone who cannot fight back, when every rule of your world says look away, walk away, protect yourself, what do you do with the 20 feet between you and the thing that is wrong? History remembered George Patton. Of course it did. The movies came, the biographies came, the statues and the speeches, and the endless celebration of the general who moved faster, fought harder, and won bigger than almost anyone else in the Second World War. George C. Scott won an Academy Award playing him. His face became shorthand for American military greatness. History, as it tends to do, remembered the man who already had power. Private James Lattimore and the thousands of men like him faded into the background of the story. The supporting cast of a war they fought just as hard, just as bravely, in a military that treated them as lesser, for a country that continued to treat them as lesser long after the last shot was fired. Their names are not on the famous monuments. Their faces are not in the famous photographs. Their stories are not in the famous movies. But they were there, in Tunisia, in the sand, boots polished, back straight, doing everything right, everything by the book, in a world that had never fully agreed to hold up its end of the deal. And here is what history cannot take away, no matter how thoroughly it tries to forget. On one ordinary morning in 1943, in the heat and the dust, in the exhaustion of a war that was still not over, a man with a riding crop and a violent temper and a soul full of contradictions walked 20 feet across a desert and stood between a soldier and a slur, and said, loudly, publicly, at a cost, that this man's uniform was the same uniform, that this man's flag was the same flag, that this man was a soldier. It was not enough to fix the system. It was not enough to save Lattimore from what waited for him at home. It was not enough to make America what it promised to be. But it was something. In a world that was offering nothing, one man offered something. In Private James Lattimore, boots polished, back straight, carried that something with him across the Atlantic, through Jim Crow, through everything America put in front of him. He carried it the way he carried everything else that life handed him, with a precision and a dignity that the world he lived in did not deserve and could never fully destroy. That is not a happy ending, but it is a true one. And true, in the long run, is the only kind of ending that means anything at all.